You've had the idea for months, maybe years. You know exactly what you want to do. Start the business, write the book, build something that actually matters to you. And on some days, you can feel it so clearly it almost hurts. You can picture the version of you who did it, who actually followed through. And then, nothing happens. Not because you're lazy, not because you don't care. You care deeply. That's almost the problem. You care so much that you've thought about it every single day. You've planned it out in your head, you've researched, you've made voice memos at 2 a.m., you've told a friend or two about it, and their excitement gave you this little rush that lasted maybe 48 hours before the whole thing quietly went back to sleep inside you. And now you're watching a video about why you still haven't done anything, which is honestly a very specific kind of irony that I think both of us can appreciate. Here's what nobody tells you. Your brain is actively, almost brilliantly, working against you. Not because it's broken, but because it's doing exactly what it was built to do. And once you see the mechanism, you can't unsee it. So let's get into it. The first thing you need to understand is something researchers call reward substitution. And it's the reason thinking about your goal can feel almost identical to actually working toward it. Here's the wild part. When you vividly imagine succeeding at something, your brain releases dopamine, the same neurochemical hit you'd get from actual progress. Scientists have studied this. Mental simulation of a positive outcome activates the brain's reward circuitry in a way that's nearly indistinguishable from experiencing the real thing. Which sounds great, right? Visualization, vision boards, manifestation. Except your brain doesn't know the difference between imagining the finish line and crossing it. So it gives you the reward before you've done the work. And once you've received the reward, the urgency to actually earn it drops. You've already felt the satisfaction. You've already gotten the dopamine. Why grind through the hard, boring, unglamorous part when you can just think about it again tomorrow? I want you to sit with that for a second, because I think a lot of us have been told that thinking about our goals is the same as working toward them. It's not. In fact, for some of us, thinking about them is the thing replacing the work entirely. There was a study by Gabrielle Oettingen at NYU where participants who positively fantasized about achieving their goals actually performed worse than those who didn't. Not slightly worse, significantly worse. Because the fantasy provided enough emotional satisfaction to drain the motivational energy they needed to actually act. The brain got its hit, it moved on. So, if you've ever had a long, detailed, exciting conversation about your dream project and then spent the rest of the week doing absolutely nothing on it, now you know why. You basically already lived it, neurochemically speaking. And this connects to something even deeper, something I'd call the addiction to potential. There's a version of you that could do anything, a future self who's disciplined, successful, doing the work. And that version, you're genuinely attached to them. Maybe more attached to the idea of who you could become than to who you actually are right now. Here's how it shows up. You talk about your dreams, not to plan them, but to feel them, to access that hit of excitement. The conversation itself becomes the product. And there's nothing wrong with being excited about your future, but when the excitement of possibility starts to replace the discomfort of effort, you're not building anything. You're just using your potential like a drug. This is painful to hear. I know because I've done it. I've had the same conversation about the same idea so many times with different people that I'd basically workshopped a TED Talk about something I never did. And each time I told the story, I felt a little more like someone who was on their way, even when I wasn't moving at all. The problem with potential is that it's safe. Potential can never fail. The moment you start actually working, actually building, actually putting real things into the world, you leave the safety of "I could" and enter the terrifying territory of "let's find out." And for a lot of us, that's where things quietly stop. Which brings us to the thing that nobody wants to name directly, the hidden fear of failure that lives underneath all of this. Now, I know that sounds like a cliche. You're afraid of failing, that's why you're not trying. Sure. But here's what makes it subtle. It's not really about failure itself, it's about what failure would prove. If you never try, your potential stays intact. You can still believe you're capable of the thing. But the moment you genuinely commit, genuinely put in months of real effort, and it doesn't work out, Now you have data, real, undeniable data about what you're capable of. And for a lot of people, the terrifying possibility isn't what if I fail, it's what if I try my absolute hardest and it still isn't good enough. That's not laziness. That's the ego doing what it was built to do, protecting your self-image. Because it's much easier to live as someone who hasn't tried yet than as someone who tried and found out the answer was no. So instead, you stay in the planning phase. You research a little more. You tell yourself you need one more book, one more course, one more piece of information before you're truly ready. You build this elaborate fortress of preparation that keeps you busy, keeps you feeling productive, while the actual starting point never gets any closer. And while you're building that fortress, something else is happening underneath. Your brain is slowly running out of gas. This is what I'd call mental exhaustion via overthinking, and it's sneakier than it sounds. Every time you analyze a possible scenario, consider a potential outcome, weigh a risk, work through a what if, you're spending mental energy, real, finite biological energy. Decision fatigue is well documented in psychology. We have a limited capacity for effortful thought each day, and if you're spending yours on an endless loop of hypotheticals, by the time you'd actually need to do something, you're tapped out. It's not that you're a bad planner, you might actually be a brilliant planner. That's part of the problem. The same brain that's capable of thinking through every variable is the same brain that runs out of steam before it ever reaches the execution phase. You've been burning fuel on the runway for so long you've got nothing left for takeoff. And here's the irony that really gets me. All that analysis, it often gives us the feeling of control without the reality of it. Because you can't actually think your way out of uncertainty. At some point, doing the thing is the only way to get the information you need. No amount of planning can replace the feedback loop that only starts when you actually begin. So then, why not just start? Right now, today. Because of what might be the most quietly devastating barrier of all, the endless wait for readiness. I'll start when things calm down. I'll start when I feel more confident. I'll start when the timing is right. Sound familiar? This isn't procrastination in the classic sense, it's more like an emotional prerequisite system. You've decided somewhere along the way that you need to feel a certain way before you're allowed to begin. And that feeling, that mythical sense of readiness, never quite arrives, because it was never real to begin with. Readiness is mostly a story we tell ourselves to make inaction feel responsible. Because waiting feels like preparation. It has a kind of virtue to it. It seems like you're being careful, being smart, not rushing in. But really, it's discomfort avoidance in a blazer. The moment you'd actually start is the moment the discomfort begins, and your brain knows that. So it keeps moving the goalposts. The psychological research on this is pretty humbling. Studies on action and confidence consistently show that confidence doesn't precede action, it follows it. You don't feel ready and then start. You start, and the starting is what eventually makes you feel ready. Every time you wait to feel confident before doing something hard, you're waiting for a feeling that can only be generated by doing the thing you're waiting to feel confident about first. It's circular, and it's a trap. But here's the one that I think is most overlooked, and honestly the most important. Identity misalignment. Your brain is not just running programs, it's running a story, a continuous, deeply embedded narrative about who you are. And that story has enormous power, because your behavior doesn't follow your goals, it follows your identity. It follows what you actually believe to be true about yourself at the level below conscious thought. Here's what that means in practice. You might genuinely want to be a disciplined, consistent, high-performing person who does the work every day. That's a real desire. But if somewhere deeper you're carrying the belief, maybe learned in childhood, maybe from years of evidence, that you're someone who doesn't finish things, who loses momentum, who's better at starting than sustaining, that belief will win. Every time. Because the brain doesn't just want you to achieve your goals, it wants you to be consistent with who you are. And when your actions contradict your identity, it creates cognitive dissonance, a kind of internal friction that the brain resolves not by changing the identity, but by changing the behavior. You self-sabotage. You lose interest right before the breakthrough. You find some reason to stop. This is why willpower alone doesn't work. You can white-knuckle your way through a week of discipline, but if you don't believe at the core level that you're the kind of person who does this, the identity will pull you back. It always does.
The real work, and this is uncomfortable, isn't in your calendar or your habit tracker. It's in that story, the one you've been telling yourself about what kind of person you are, what you're capable of, what you deserve. That's the thing that actually needs to change. And it changes slowly, through small, consistent actions that accumulate evidence over time until eventually the story starts to update. So, here's where I want to leave you. If you've been confusing the dream with the work, that's not a character flaw, that's neurochemistry. If you've been addicted to your own potential, that's not arrogance, that's a fear response wearing optimism as a mask. If you've been waiting to feel ready, you're going to wait forever, and you know it. The version of you that actually builds the thing isn't going to emerge from more thinking, more planning, or the perfect moment. That version gets built the same way everything real gets built, imperfectly, uncomfortably, one unglamorous day at a time. You don't have to be ready, you just have to start. And if this hit something in you, a little too specifically maybe, consider subscribing. I make videos like this every week, sitting at the intersection of psychology and real life, trying to understand why we do the things we do and what we can actually do about it. Not motivational fluff, not 5 steps to success, just honest, research-grounded conversations about the hard stuff. We'll see you in the next one.